The night sky over the desert planet burned with streaks of falling fire. Among them was a silver vessel, its hull cracked, flames trailing behind as it fell through the thin air. Inside, alarms screamed and lights flashed red. The crew of the Cathari science vessel Virlen struggled to keep control. They were proud beings, tall and pale-skinned, known across the stars for their calm logic and strict discipline. But even calm hearts faltered when systems failed. Lieutenant Lyra Vell, the youngest officer aboard, gripped her console as the ship shuddered. She was supposed to be studying mineral storms, not fighting for her life. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. "Stabilizers offline," someone shouted. Lyra tried to override the failing engines, but the command screen flickered and died. A sudden explosion threw her backward as smoke filled the cabin. The air tasted like burnt metal. The captain shouted for everyone to abandon ship. One by one, escape pods launched into the storm. Lyra ran toward her pod, coughing, her breathing mask half melted. The walls groaned and bent. She reached the pod bay just as another blast shook the deck. A heavy beam crashed behind her, pinning her leg for a moment. Pain shot through her, but she forced herself free. She dove inside her escape pod, slamming the hatch button. Nothing happened. The mechanism jammed. She hit it again and again, but it wouldn't close. Fire licked the corridor outside. "Come on," she whispered desperately. Then everything went black. Far above the burning desert, a small human ship named Iron Hope was passing through the outer edge of the system. Its pilot, Mason Reed, was scanning for salvage. His freighter was old, rusted panels, humming engines, patched with mismatched parts, but it kept him alive. Mason was a lone operator, one of those humans who worked the frontier zones where most dared not go. He was used to quiet nights trading broken machines for fuel or food, but that night his sensors went wild. An unidentified vessel was falling through atmosphere, breaking apart fast. Mason frowned, adjusting the controls. The data feed showed it wasn't human. Its design was far too sleek, too elegant. "Cathari ship?" he murmured. The Cathari Empire never came this far. He hesitated for only a second before he muttered, "Ah, hell," and turned his freighter toward the crash site. The ship hit the desert hard. Dust and flame rose into the dark. Mason landed his freighter nearby, pulling on his helmet and oxygen pack. The air was thin here, barely breathable. He grabbed a flashlight and a cutting torch, then ran into the storm. The wreck was a nightmare of twisted metal. One side was buried in the sand. The other burned bright orange. He called out, "Anyone alive?" but got only static in reply. He moved through the broken corridor, stepping over fallen beams and glowing fragments. His scanner picked up a faint life sign ahead. Mason followed it through smoke until he saw her, an alien girl, unconscious, half trapped under debris. Her pale skin glimmered faintly and her silver uniform was torn. Her rebreather mask was cracked, air hissing from it. Mason dropped his torch and knelt beside her. "Hang on," he said, pulling away the metal slab. It was heavy, but he used the torch to cut through it piece by piece until she was free. When he lifted her, her eyes fluttered open, bright violet and sharp with fear. She tried to speak, but her breath failed. Her mask flickered. Without thinking, Mason removed his own oxygen unit and pressed it over her face. "Easy," he whispered. She coughed once, then started breathing again. Her hand gripped his arm weakly as her vision cleared. The sight of a human, dusty, rough and unshaven, seemed to confuse her. Before she could speak, the wreck groaned and another explosion shook the ground. Mason picked her up and carried her through the collapsing passage. Outside, the night wind howled. His freighter's lights glowed through the sandstorm. He ran toward it, shielding her from the heat and falling debris. When he reached the ramp, he laid her on the metal floor, gasping for air himself. He quickly sealed the hatch and pressurized the cabin. The hum of the engines returned, steady and safe. For a moment, Mason leaned against the wall, exhausted but relieved. He turned to look at her. She was alive. Her breathing was steady again. Her silver hair scattered across the floor like light. He placed her on the medical bed, scanning her vitals with his old med tool. "You're going to be okay," he said softly, mostly to himself. He bandaged a burn on her arm and adjusted the oxygen flow. She stirred once or twice but didn't wake. Mason sat beside her for a while, just watching the rise and fall of her chest, then finally leaned back in his chair and dozed off. Hours later, when he woke, the ship was quiet. He looked over and saw her standing near the wall, fully awake. Her glowing eyes were locked on him, cold and angry. "Where am I?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp, every word crisp and controlled. Mason stood up slowly. "You're on my ship," he said. "I pulled you out of the wreck. You would have died out there." She blinked, then stepped back as if his words were poison. "You touched me?" He frowned. "I dragged you out of a burning ship." "Yeah, I touched you. You were unconscious." Lyra's face hardened. "You had no permission," she said. "You broke our law." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Your law?" He gave a short laugh. "Lady, if I hadn't broken your law, you'd be dead right now." Her glare didn't soften. "You don't understand," she said. "In my culture, being saved by someone without consent is shameful. It means you took something that was not yours to take. My right to face death." Mason blinked. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Her eyes flared. "You dare insult the Cathari Code?" She snapped. Mason crossed his arms. "I dare keep you alive. You can be mad about it later." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the engines filling the space. Then she turned away, shaking slightly. "You humans. You act first and think later," she said quietly. Mason gave a small grin. "That's why we survive." She looked around the cabin. Rusted walls, patched controls, hand-drawn notes taped to the panels. It was nothing like the clean, perfect Cathari vessels. Everything here was worn and imperfect, but alive. She could feel it. The human ship seemed to breathe along with its pilot. Mason walked back to the cockpit and began checking readings. "We'll head for the nearest station," he said over his shoulder. "Once we find your people, you're free to go." Lyra said nothing. She sat down, touching the bandage on her arm. The wound stung, but it was healing. She remembered the heat of the fire, the crushing weight, and then strong arms pulling her free. She hated the memory, hated how powerless she had been, but a small part of her couldn't stop thinking about the human's eyes. Not proud, not cruel, just tired and kind. She shook the thought away. "I owe you nothing," she said suddenly. Mason didn't look up. "Didn't ask for anything," he replied. Outside the window, dawn rose over the red desert. The sunlight touched the wreck far below, turning it into a line of glittering ash. Lyra stared at it silently. Her ship, her crew, her mission, gone. Only this human stood between her and the emptiness. And though she wanted to hate him, she couldn't quite find the strength. Not yet. The next morning, Mason was already in the cockpit when Lyra entered, still wearing the silver uniform that had survived the crash. Her face looked calm, but her eyes showed stormy thoughts. She stood silently behind him, arms crossed. The hum of the ship filled the air. He glanced at her reflection on the glass. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "I don't require much rest," she said quickly. He smirked. "Figures. You people probably don't even dream." Lyra didn't answer. Her gaze drifted to the stars outside. Her people had ruled these skies for centuries, yet right now, she was stranded on a human ship, rescued, shamed, and still trying to understand this man who didn't seem to follow any rule she knew. Mason tapped the controls. "We're running low on fuel. Gonna stop by an outpost before we head to the trade route. Maybe someone's seen your fleet." Lyra looked at the radar display. "You are flying through a restricted zone," she said coldly. "Yeah, I noticed," he replied. "But it's the only way around the storms. Unless you can fly this thing yourself?" Her lips tightened. She could pilot any Cathari ship with her eyes closed. But this human machine looked nothing like theirs. The controls were physical switches, not smooth holograms. It was crude yet dependable, like the man flying it. For hours, silence filled the cabin. Mason tried to start a conversation twice, but Lyra ignored him both times. She sat near the scanner, studying the readings. The more she looked, the more she realized his systems were ancient, patched together with spare parts from at least 4 different designs. Still, they worked. That in itself impressed her. Humans, she thought, might be reckless, but they were clever survivors. Suddenly, a sharp beeping broke the quiet. Mason frowned. "That's not good." "What is it?" Lyra asked, leaning closer. "Pirate signature." 2 ships. Closing fast. "Pirates?" she repeated. "Then we must signal for help." "Already tried," Mason said. "Comm relays out of range. We're on our own." The ship trembled as 2 dark vessels appeared on the radar, moving faster than them. Mason cursed softly, gripping the controls. "Guess they smelled our smoke." Lyra stepped back, her hand instinctively going to the small energy blade at her belt. but she had no power cell for it. "We should surrender," she said quickly. "If we explain who I am, they will not harm us." Mason shot her a look. "Lady, these aren't diplomats. They'll strip the ship and sell you to the highest bidder." Her voice went cold. "No one sells a Kethari officer." He shook his head. "They won't ask for your opinion." The pirate sent a hail. Mason ignored it. The screen blinked red as laser fire struck the hull. The whole ship rattled. Lyra stumbled, grabbing a railing. "Shields?" she asked sharply. "Low power," Mason said. "We don't have much, but it'll have to do." Another blast hit them. Mason switched off the autopilot and took manual control. "Hold on." He dove the ship toward a canyon below. The engines roared as they skimmed the rocky surface. Dust and flame filled the sky behind them. The pirates followed, firing again. Lyra's heart pounded. She had never seen anyone fly like that, not even Kethari pilots. Mason's movements were instinctive, wild, and precise at the same time. "They're locking missiles," she warned. "Not if I jam them first," Mason said. He slammed a switch, releasing a burst of electronic noise. The first missile exploded mid-air, but another one still followed. Mason turned the ship sharply, letting it graze along the canyon wall. The explosion behind them shook the whole ridge. Metal shards flew past the cockpit. Lyra stared in disbelief. "You're insane." "Probably," Mason said with a grin. "But it's working, isn't it?" The second pirate ship fired again, grazing their rear engine. The warning lights flared red. Mason's smile faded. "We're losing thrust." Lyra's hands moved before she realized it. "Let me reroute the cooling lines," she said, rushing to the side console. Mason gave a short nod. "Do it." Her fingers flew over the old buttons, her mind adapting quickly to the crude design. "Try now." He pushed the throttle. The ship roared back to life. "There we go," he said, pulling up sharply. The freighter shot upward, rising out of the canyon. The pirates chased them into open sky. Mason pressed a switch on his control panel labeled Manual Turret. Time to scare them off. He jumped to the side gun station, leaving Lyra to hold the pilot's seat. She stared at the glowing controls nervously. "What am I supposed to do?" "Keep us level," he shouted from the gun bay. "And don't crash." The ship shook as the turrets roared. Blue bolts fired from the sides, hitting one pirate ship dead on. It burst into flames, spinning out of control. The second ship turned to flee. Mason fired one last shot, hitting its engine. It limped away into space. The sky went quiet again. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of cooling engines. Mason finally walked back into the cockpit, sweat on his face, and dropped into his chair. "Told you we'd make it." Lyra looked at him with wide eyes. "You fought 2 ships with that." "Old machine," she said slowly. He shrugged. "She may be old, but she's got heart. Just like her pilot." Something changed in her expression then. It wasn't quite admiration, but it wasn't hatred either. For the first time, she looked at him without anger. "You could have left me," she said softly. "When they attacked?" "Yeah," he said, turning a switch. "But I don't leave people behind. Not anymore." "What do you mean?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at the stars ahead, his jaw tight. She noticed his hand tremble slightly when he reached for the throttle. Later, when he went to rest, Lyra moved quietly through the ship. She stopped in the cargo bay where old boxes and fuel canisters filled the room. On one wall hung a few photos printed on real paper. One showed Mason with a small crew smiling, standing on a human colony world. The next photo showed the same colony in ruins, burned buildings, dark skies. The words written under it said, "For the ones we couldn't save." Lyra touched the picture gently. So that was it. That was why he couldn't let anyone die. Why he had risked everything for a stranger. He had already lost too many before. Her throat tightened slightly, but she pushed the feeling down. Kethari officers were not supposed to feel sympathy for outsiders. She turned and noticed something else. A small metal badge, old and scratched, lying on the table. She picked it up and read the faded engraving, Frontier Defense Corps. It was a human military emblem. Mason had once been a soldier. She wondered what kind of war had taken his friends away. When she heard his footsteps, she quickly put everything back. Mason appeared in the doorway carrying a mug of coffee. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I was studying your ship," she said. He smiled slightly. "Find anything worth stealing?" "Only confusion," she said quietly. You fight like a machine, but you live like a wanderer. You save strangers without being asked. What kind of logic is that? Mason took a sip and shrugged. Maybe it's not logic. Maybe it's just what keeps me human. She looked at him for a long moment. In my world, emotions are weakness, she said. He met her gaze. In mine, they're the only thing that makes life worth living. Her expression softened for the first time. She turned away before he could see it. You should rest, she said firmly. Yeah, he replied, setting down his mug. Tomorrow we'll reach the signal range. You'll be home soon. When she returned to her small cabin, she sat in silence. The word home echoed strangely in her mind. The thought of seeing her people again should have filled her with relief, but instead it left her uncertain. She lay down, staring at the dull ceiling, thinking about the human who had saved her twice now, once from fire, once from fear. Outside, the stars drifted past the window like slow-burning embers. Somewhere beyond them, a fleet was probably searching for her, yet tonight in this small imperfect ship, she felt something new, a quiet she had never known before. And though she didn't understand it, she whispered softly to herself, maybe not all mistakes are shameful. The next morning, the stars outside Mason's freighter glowed brighter than usual. A soft alarm beeped across the control panel, breaking the quiet. Mason rubbed his eyes and leaned forward. The screen showed an incoming signal, strong, official, and precise. Lyra entered the cockpit, her long silver hair tied back, her face calm. That frequency, she said quickly. It's Cathari command. Mason gave a small nod. Guess they finally found you. Her heart jumped, though she tried not to show it. For days she had dreamed of being rescued, of returning to the world she knew. But now, as the moment arrived, she felt something she didn't expect, uneasy. The signal grew louder. A deep, mechanical voice filled the cabin. Unidentified human vessel. This is Cathari Fleet Command. You are holding one of our officers. Power down engines and prepare for inspection. Mason sighed and leaned back. Friendly as always. Lyra turned to him. You must do as they say. They will not harm you if you comply. He smiled faintly. Yeah, sure. Because last time I met Cathari, they totally offered me coffee and snacks. Her brow furrowed. This is serious, Mason. They will not understand your humor. He shrugged. I don't expect them to. Outside, massive ships began to appear. Sleek silver cruisers surrounded his small freighter, their engines glowing blue. They were beautiful and terrifying, like blades made of light. Mason felt the weight of their presence pressing down on him. His ship looked like a toy beside them. A bright beam scanned the hull, then locked onto their docking port. They're connecting, Mason said. Lyra straightened her uniform, though it was still torn and burned. Let me speak first, she said firmly. Do not argue. Do not resist. Wouldn't dream of it, he said softly. But in his eyes there was no fear, only a quiet readiness. The airlock opened with a hiss. 3 Cathari guards entered, tall and armored, their eyes glowing under their helmets. Behind them came a man in silver robes, the fleet commander. His face was pale and sharp, his voice colder than steel. Lieutenant Lyra Vell, he said. Step forward. Lyra obeyed, standing straight. Commander, I am alive because of this human's aid. The commander's gaze turned to Mason. Aid? He repeated, his tone sharp. You mean interference. Mason frowned. I pulled her out of a burning ship. You're welcome. The commander ignored him. Human, do you understand that saving a Cathari officer without permission is a violation of our sovereignty? Mason blinked. You're joking, right? No, the commander said flatly. By our code, her life was not yours to take or preserve. The act binds you both by debt. Lyra stepped forward. Commander, please. He meant no harm. He didn't know our laws. That is irrelevant, the commander said. He must answer for his actions. Mason crossed his arms. So what's the punishment for saving someone's life? A fine? The commander's eyes narrowed. No, the debt must be balanced. Either the saved returns the life to the rescuer or the rescuer becomes property of the saved until repayment. Lyra's face went pale. That law was never meant for outsiders. It applies to all, the commander said. You know this, Lieutenant. Mason gave a small laugh. So either you kill me or I become your project? Lyra turned to him, her voice low. It is not a choice you deserve to face. The guard stepped forward. Mason raised his hands calmly. Hey, easy there. No need for cuffs. The commander nodded at them. Take him. But before they could move, Lyra spoke loudly. Stop. Everyone froze. Her voice echoed through the small cabin. If the code demands balance, then I claim it myself. His debt is mine to bear. The commander stared at her. You would bind your name to a human? Yes, she said firmly, because he did not act with greed or malice. He acted with honor. Silence filled the ship. The commander's expression hardened. Your compassion blinds you, Lieutenant. You are still young. I am Cathari, she said, and I know our honor is meaningless if it punishes those who act with kindness. The commander turned away, speaking quietly to his officers. Mason stood still watching her. For the first time, he saw the proud alien girl not as cold or angry, but brave. She was risking everything for him. After a moment, the commander faced them again. Very well. If you wish to bear his debt, the council will judge it when we return to the fleet. Until then, the human remains in your custody. He signaled the guards to withdraw. Lyra exhaled softly. Mason gave her a crooked smile. So, I'm your prisoner now? She looked at him and replied quietly, No. You are under my protection. When the commander left, Mason leaned against the wall. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she said. They would have taken you away. You would not survive their justice. He chuckled. You sound like you care. She didn't answer. The Cathari fleet surrounded them for escort, guiding the small freighter toward the flagship. The silence between them was heavy. Lyra finally spoke. Once we reach the council, they will ask what happened. I will tell them you acted with good intent. And they'll just let me go? He asked. She hesitated. I hope so. When they arrived aboard the flagship, the scale of the ship left Mason speechless. Its corridors gleamed like crystal, filled with silent soldiers who stared at him as if he were a strange animal. Lyra walked beside him, head held high. Her people whispered as they passed, shocked that a noble officer walked beside a human. They reached the council chamber, a vast hall with tall glass walls showing the stars beyond. The Cathari council elders sat in a semicircle. The commander stood near them, waiting. Lyra stepped forward and bowed. Honored council, I bring before you the human who saved my life. An elder with glowing eyes leaned forward. Saved? Or violated our law? Both, she said honestly. But his intention was pure. He risked his life for mine. Another elder hissed softly. Humans act from impulse, not honor. Mason stepped forward. With respect, maybe you're right. But impulse is why she's still breathing. Sometimes you don't have time for rules when someone's dying. The chamber grew quiet. The elders stared at him. Lyra looked between them, her voice trembling but strong. If mercy is a crime, then I share it. I cannot accept punishment for his kindness. The oldest elder stood. His voice echoed deep and calm. The law exists to protect pride, not justice, and pride has blinded us long enough. He turned to Mason. Human, your action broke our code but revealed its weakness. You are free. Mason blinked in surprise. That's it? The elder nodded. That is it. The commander looked displeased, but he obeyed. Release them, he said coldly. As the council dismissed, Lyra turned to Mason. You may leave with your ship. No one will follow you. He smiled faintly. And you? She hesitated. I must face my people, my career, my rank. They may be gone now. He looked at her quietly. You could come with me. I've got plenty of room and terrible coffee." For a long time, she didn't answer. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, small but real. "Your ship is noisy and your habits are strange," she said softly. "But perhaps I could learn from them." When they returned to the freighter, the fleet slowly moved away, leaving them alone among the stars. Mason sat in the pilot's seat, tapping the console. "So, where to now?" Lyra stood beside him, watching the endless sky. "Anywhere," she said, "as long as we are not bound by laws that punish kindness." He grinned. Then it settled. The engines rumbled, lifting the small ship into the dark. The stars stretched before them, bright and endless. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt free, not as a soldier or a noble, but as herself. She looked at Mason and whispered, "Perhaps saving someone without permission is not always wrong." He glanced at her with a smile. "Told you so." As their ship disappeared into the horizon, the stars behind them shimmered quietly. Two lives, once divided by law and pride, now traveling together toward a future neither empire nor code could predict.